The rain had turned the iron gates of the Hart estate into dark rivers of reflection when she arrived. The kind of storm that felt like a warning. Inside, silence hung like a held breath. The chandeliers burned with pale gold, and somewhere beyond the marble hall, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate. When he appeared, his presence filled the space like gravity itself. She handed over her resume, hands trembling from the cold, and watched his eyes freeze at the name on the page. The silence stretched until it felt alive. Then came the question. Soft, precise, devastating. "Why do you have my last name?" For a heartbeat, the air seemed to stop moving. Behind him, a portrait flickered in the light. A woman with eyes too familiar. The storm outside broke against the windows as if the world itself wanted to hear the answer. He didn't speak again for several seconds, as if the question had unsettled him more than he wanted her to see. The housekeeper appeared with trembling hands and offered tea, but he waved her away. Evelyn's throat tightened. She felt the weight of every second in that silence. When he finally told her to follow, she obeyed without knowing why. The corridor stretched endlessly, lined with portraits of people who shared her features. Every glance at the walls felt like accusation. Somewhere behind them, the door creaked closed, and the sound was final, like a verdict. He stopped before a tall glass window overlooking the courtyard. "You said your name is Evelyn Hart?" he asked without turning. She nodded. "Who was your father?" Her answer came in fragments. "I don't know. My mother never said." The wind pressed against the glass like a presence. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, regret, perhaps fear. "You'll start tomorrow," he said quietly, almost distractedly. "I'll have someone show you to the quarters." But as she walked away, she could feel his gaze following her, like someone watching a ghost. In the small servants' quarters, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, the sound of thunder muffled by the walls. She unpacked what little she had: a photograph of her mother, folded clothes, a half-broken watch. She couldn't stop hearing his question, couldn't stop seeing the shock behind his control. Somewhere in the house above her, footsteps moved again. She thought she was alone, until a soft knock came at the door. "You shouldn't have come here," a woman's voice whispered through the dark. The woman at the door stepped into the light. Elderly, frail, but sharp-eyed. She introduced herself as Margaret, the housekeeper, and looked at Evelyn with something between pity and alarm. "I've seen that name before," she said softly, "on letters that were never supposed to exist." Evelyn's breath caught, her pulse quickening. "What letters?" But the woman only shook her head, eyes glancing toward the ceiling as if afraid the house itself was listening. "Some truths don't stay buried," she murmured. "Especially not in this family." Morning came pale and silent, as if the storm had scrubbed the world clean, but left its ghosts behind. Evelyn woke to the soft hum of voices outside her door. Her name being whispered, passed through corridors not meant for her. When she stepped into the hallway, the air was sharp with polished cedar and unease. At the far end, Alexander was waiting, immaculate in a dark suit, his expression carved from restraint. He told her the position had been filled, then paused, eyes flicking over her once more. "But perhaps," he said slowly, "there's another arrangement we can discuss." It wasn't an offer. It was an invitation and a test. She followed him through rooms that felt more like museums than living spaces. The silence of old wealth pressed against her ribs. He spoke little, his words precise, his tone distant. Yet something in the way he glanced at her betrayed curiosity. When they reached the breakfast room, a woman looked up from a silver coffee pot, her gaze assessing and cool. Beatrice Langford Hart. The kind of beauty that ages into command. "So," Beatrice said, her smile too controlled, This is the girl with our name. Evelyn's pulse stuttered. Alexander's silence deepened. The meal that followed was an interrogation disguised as courtesy. Beatrice asked about her background, her mother, her schooling. Every question a blade dressed as concern. Evelyn answered as best she could, but her honesty only seemed to tighten the air around them. Alexander remained silent until the end, when Beatrice excused herself with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. As soon as she was gone, he leaned forward. "You'll stay here," he said. Temporarily, his tone left no room for refusal. "I want to know exactly who you are." Later, Oliver arrived with quiet precision. His uniform was immaculate, his voice low, his movements deliberate. He showed Evelyn to a room upstairs, not among the staff, but down a private corridor where the family's guests stayed. The walls smelled faintly of old perfume. As he set down her suitcase, he said softly, "People disappear from this house when they ask too many questions." His eyes lingered on her face, a moment longer than propriety allowed. "Be careful which doors you open." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The estate whispered, old wood shifting, clocks ticking, whispers of movement in rooms she hadn't seen. She rose, drawn by a faint light under a nearby door. Through the crack, she saw Alexander alone in his study, staring at an open drawer filled with letters bound in faded blue ribbon. He lifted one, traced the handwriting, and exhaled a name she couldn't hear. The moment felt private, fragile, wrong to witness. Yet she couldn't look away. Somewhere deep inside, she knew those letters had everything to do with her. The next morning, the estate felt different, quieter, as though holding its breath. Evelyn wandered through the corridors with a dust cloth, and a purpose she didn't yet admit to herself. Her path led to a room at the end of a forgotten wing, its door slightly ajar. Inside, dust shimmered in the sunlight like fine snow. Old photographs lined the walls, black and white, silver-framed memories of generations gone. And then she saw it, a family portrait where a young woman stood slightly apart from the others, her smile faint, her eyes unmistakable. It was her mother. Her hands trembled as she traced the edge of the photo. A whisper escaped her. A name, her mother's, and the sound startled an echo from the old walls. Margaret appeared behind her without sound, like the house itself had sent her. "You shouldn't be in here," she murmured, but her gaze softened when she saw what Evelyn held. "She worked here," Margaret said quietly, "long before you were born." Evelyn turned to her, heart pounding. "Then you knew her?" The old woman hesitated. "I knew the truth that destroyed her." They sat together on a bench beneath the portraits, the air thick with the weight of unspoken memory. Margaret spoke in fragments, a forbidden affair, a promise broken, a child hidden away. Evelyn listened, each word tightening the invisible thread that tied her to this house. "Your mother was not a servant," Margaret whispered. "She was love. But love in this family always comes at a price." Outside, the afternoon light shifted, glancing off the marble like an omen. When night fell, Evelyn crept back to the gallery, compelled by something deeper than curiosity. The house was silent except for the whisper of wind through the halls. She searched the drawers beneath the portraits and found an envelope sealed with wax, bearing the heart crest. Inside was a photograph of her mother, smiling beside a man, Alexander's father. The edges of the image were burned, as if someone had tried to erase it from existence. Her heart pounded, and she felt the walls close in. Secrets had weight here, and they were pressing down. By morning, she could no longer hide what she'd found. Evelyn entered Alexander's study and laid the photograph on his desk without a word. He looked at it, and for the first time, his composure cracked. He rose slowly, as if burdened by years he'd never confessed. "That," he said, voice low and unsteady, "was my father." His eyes met hers, cold blue meeting brown fire, and something like guilt passed between them. "Tell me," she whispered. Who was my mother to him? His answer came soft as a confession. Everything he wasn't supposed to love. The day began in stillness, but the air inside the estate felt charged, as if every portrait and polished surface waited for something to shatter. Evelyn stood in the grand hall, the photograph clutched in her hand, the echo of Alexander's voice replaying in her mind. When he entered, she didn't bow, didn't falter. "You owe me the truth," she said quietly. For a moment, he said nothing, only watched her with eyes full of years and regret. Then, with the smallest nod, he motioned for her to follow. He led her down to the wine cellar, the one place the staff never entered. Beneath its stone vaults, he finally began to speak. The cellar smelled of dust, oak, and secrets. Bottles lined the walls like witnesses. Alexander poured himself a glass of brandy before he spoke. "My father was not a kind man," he began. "He took what he wanted, and what he wanted was your mother." Evelyn listened, her pulse thrumming in her throat. "She was promised protection," he continued. "Instead, she was sent away when the whispers began." He looked at her then, the mask finally gone. "You shouldn't have carried our name, but it was the only thing she could give you." Evelyn's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "And you?" she asked. "What do you plan to give me?" When they emerged from the cellar, the storm that had gathered all morning finally broke. Beatrice stood waiting in the corridor, her posture sharp, her expression brittle with fury. "You told her," she said, her voice trembling under its own restraint. Alexander's silence was an answer. "Do you have any idea what this will do to us?" she hissed. Evelyn stepped forward, the photograph in her hand trembling slightly. "Maybe it's time someone stopped pretending," she said. The thunder outside crashed like punctuation, and Beatrice's eyes filled with something venomous, fear disguised as dignity. Later in the library, Evelyn confronted Alexander again. Not for truth this time, but for acknowledgement. "You could end this," she said. "You could tell them who I am." His answer came like a whoop. "You think a name can save you? In this family, names are currency, not love." She stepped closer. "Then, maybe it's time to change what it means." His eyes softened, only for a second, before he turned away. Outside, the rain began again, quiet but relentless, as if the world itself refused to let them forget. That night, Evelyn packed her things. The house no longer felt like a place of answers, but of decay. Yet before she could leave, a knock came. Oliver. His voice was urgent. "You're not safe," he said. "Beatrice knows you've seen the photograph. She's ordered me to make it disappear. And you with it." Evelyn stared at him, the shock too large for words. "Then why are you telling me?" she whispered. His gaze softened. "Because not everyone in this house has forgotten how to be human." Oh, the next morning the mansion was unnervingly calm. Too calm, as if the walls themselves were waiting for orders. Evelyn noticed the sudden absence of staff, the way whispers ceased when she entered a room. Beatrice's control had tightened like a noose. Over breakfast, Alexander barely met her eyes, his silence now a shield. Beatrice's voice was sweet when she spoke, honey laced with poison. "Oliver will escort you into the city today," she said. "We'll make sure you're taken care of." The phrase sounded final, and Evelyn's heart began to race. She smiled politely and nodded, already planning her escape. Oliver met her by the courtyard gates, his car idling under the trees. His face was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed urgency. As they drove down the long gravel road, Evelyn caught sight of the estate shrinking in the rearview mirror, its windows watching her like unblinking eyes. "She told me to make sure you don't come back," Oliver said finally. "But I don't take orders from fear." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a copy of her mother's employment record, stamped Hart Estate, 1996. On the back, a handwritten note: "For your protection, keep this hidden." Hours later, Evelyn returned to the city she once called home. Its noise and grit felt almost like safety. She found an old contact of her mother's in Queens, a woman named Clara, who ran a small photo studio. When Evelyn showed her the photograph, Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Your mother told me he'd come for her one day," she whispered. "But it wasn't the man in the photo who came. It was his wife." The words landed like a blow. She paid her to disappear. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a wound reopening. Back at the estate, Beatrice watched the rain from her balcony, fingers tightening around a crystal glass. "Do it quietly," she told the man on the phone. "No police. No questions." Her reflection in the glass window looked almost unfamiliar. Poised, beautiful, monstrous. Downstairs, Alexander listened from the doorway. He said nothing, but something in his eyes shifted. A line crossed, a lifetime of silence fracturing. He poured himself a drink and stared into it as though searching for absolution at the bottom of the glass. That night, a knock came at Evelyn's apartment door. She froze. Through the peephole, she saw Oliver, rain-soaked, breathless. "They sent someone," he said. "You have to go now." The urgency in his voice left no room for disbelief. Together they fled into the city, night, lights blurring through the downpour. As they ran through the empty streets, Evelyn clutched the envelope against her chest. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about family or truth. It was survival. Behind them, thunder rolled, echoing the fury of the world she'd left behind. Days passed in hiding. The city never slept, but Evelyn barely did either. Oliver had found them a safe apartment above an old tailor shop in Brooklyn. The kind of place where anonymity was currency. The truth still pulsed between them, unspoken yet alive. When Alexander's message came through, "I need to see you," she knew the moment had come. Beneath the fear was something sharper. Resolve. This wasn't about belonging anymore. It was about taking back the power her family had buried with lies. When she arrived at the Hart estate again, it no longer looked like a fortress. It looked like a relic. Reporters clustered at the gates, cameras flashing like lightning. The scandal had already leaked. A rumored heir, hidden bloodlines, whispers of illegitimacy. Beatrice stood at the window above, her poise cracked for the first time. Alexander waited in the study, a DNA test lying open on his desk. When Evelyn entered, he looked at her not as an intruder, but as something inevitable. "It's true," he said softly. "You are my sister." The words landed like absolution and curse in one breath. The revelation spread faster than the storm. News anchors spoke her name with fascination. Tabloids framed her as a scandal, not a person. Beatrice's calls went unanswered as investors pulled out, partnerships dissolved, and the Hart crest, once untouchable, became a headline. Evelyn watched it all from the periphery, numb to the chaos. She hadn't sought revenge, but truth had a way of destroying whatever tried to cage it. In the quiet after the noise, she wondered if justice always had to taste like ashes. At the estate, Alexander held a press conference alone. He admitted the truth. His father's affair, the buried child, the silence he'd maintained to protect the family's name. He didn't mention Evelyn directly, but everyone knew. "We built our empire on stone," he said, voice low, "and forgot that stone can crack." Cameras clicked like gunfire, and for a moment he looked relieved, as if confession had finally bought him peace. Watching from afar, Evelyn felt the strangest ache. Compassion. Even after everything, part of her still saw the boy who'd grown up under another man's sins. Later that night, Evelyn returned one last time. The mansion was empty, its lights dimmed, the echoes of power gone. She found Alexander alone in the study, a single lamp burning beside him. "You've lost everything," she said softly. He shook his head. "Not everything." His gaze lifted to her, clear for the first time. "You've given me a chance to be human again." She reached into her coat and placed the scorched photograph on the desk. the same one that had started it all. "Then bury the past," she said, "and let the truth live." Dawn arrived softly over the ruins of wealth. The news cycle had moved on, the world already chasing fresher scandals. The Hart name, once spoken with reverence, now carried a tremor of shame. Yet inside a modest Brooklyn cafe, Evelyn sat quietly, sipping coffee that tasted of peace more than victory. She read a letter from Alexander, handwritten, no signature, only a single sentence: "I've stepped down. The name is yours if you want it." She folded it neatly and smiled faintly. Some inherit fortunes, others inherit freedom. She'd take the latter. Meanwhile, in the empty halls of the Hart estate, Alexander walked alone. Reporters were gone, the staff dismissed, the empire dismantled piece by piece. Yet the silence no longer felt oppressive. It felt deserved. He stopped before the portrait of his father, the man whose sins had written their history. "You built a dynasty," he whispered, but she gave it meaning. He removed the painting from the wall, placed it face down, and left the room without looking back. For the first time, he felt light. Weeks later, Evelyn visited Margaret's small cottage outside the city. The old woman's health had declined, but her eyes still gleamed with that same unflinching clarity. Evelyn brought her a framed copy of the photograph. Restored, unburned, finally whole. "So they'll remember her," Evelyn said. Margaret smiled faintly. "Child," she murmured, "they'll remember you." Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a sigh. Some stories didn't end. They simply stopped hiding. As spring returned, Evelyn walked along the East River, watching the skyline shimmer like liquid glass. She thought of her mother, of the lies that built a dynasty, of the truth that dismantled it. She'd expected rage or relief, but instead she felt something quieter. Belonging, not to a name, but to herself. Behind her, Oliver approached, his presence steady as always. "You never took the money," he said. She smiled without turning. "That's because it was never about money." Their laughter drifted across the water, light as air. That night, Evelyn wrote her mother's name on an envelope and tucked inside the old photograph, not as evidence, but as offering. She left it on her windowsill, where dawn would touch it first. Across the river, Alexander watched the sun rise from his empty balcony, a faint smile ghosting his lips. For the first time, the name Hart meant something honest. Not power, not control, but the stubborn, fragile persistence of love. The world outside glimmered with morning light, and somewhere in that light, forgiveness took root.